Colorado Territory, 1870. The wagon came crawling through the high grass just before sunset, the world the color of rust and honey. Dust rose in wide ribbons behind it, and the wheels creaked like old bones. The driver's whip snapped over the backs of 2 mules, and the wind carried the smell of sage, iron, and distance. Clara May Holt sat perched on the rear plank with her carpet bag wedged between her boots, one hand gripping the side rail, as though it might steady not just her body, but her whole trembling life. The journey had been long, longer than the miles. 3 days from Abilene. 5 since she'd last slept properly. 10 since she decided she'd rather risk the western unknown than the familiar danger of the South. The wagon man spat over the side.
Caldwell's place is up ahead. Big feller. Keeps to himself. You sure he's expecting you?
Clara smoothed the paper in her lap. A letter, the ink slightly blurred by travel. Wanted, domestic help, sewing and cooking, fair wages, board included. Signed neatly, Beau Caldwell, Ridge Hollow Ranch. Yes, she said, mostly to convince herself. The driver grunted.
He ain't much for talking. Just a warning.
She almost smiled. Then we'll get along fine. When they reached the ridge, she saw the ranch spread below, a clapboard house withered by storms, smoke rising pale from its chimney, a half-built corral leaning against the sweep of the prairie. Beyond it, the mountains loomed violet and endless. A tall man stood by the gate, arms bare to the elbow, hammer in hand. He looked up as the wagon halted, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. Beau Caldwell did not move at once. He simply stared, as though the sight of a woman stepping down from the wagon, small, brown-skinned, and upright with purpose, had disrupted the rhythm of his solitude.
You the new hand?
His voice carried, low and graveled, shaped by years of command and dust. I'm the seamstress and cook you advertised for. The wind teased a lock of her hair loose from her bonnet. He watched it dance against her cheek, then nodded once.
Didn't figure they'd send a lady.
Nor did I figure they'd send a colonel, she answered. The smallest curve touched his mouth. A flicker of humor or respect, it was hard to tell which.
Stable's that way, he said. You'll have the side room by the kitchen. Supper at sundown.
She gathered her carpet bag. Stepping onto the packed earth, her boots sank half an inch in the dust, and the world fell silent but for the whistle of the wind and the steady thud of her heart. That was their first meeting. Not a greeting, not yet a welcome. Just 2 weary lives intersecting on a ridge too wide for either of them to feel alone. The first week she learned the shape of his world. Beau rose before dawn. She would hear the scrape of the chair, the hinge of the door, then silence broken only by the rhythmic thud of an axe and the distant low of cattle. When he returned, his shirt clung to him, the lines of his shoulders like something cut from granite. He drank his coffee black and wordless, nod once if she offered bread. Then he'd be gone again. Clara kept the house with quiet efficiency, sweeping, boiling linens, cooking what the pantry allowed. He never praised nor complained, but he noticed. His eyes tracked the neatness of folded clothes, the glint of polished tin, the scent of cornbread cooling by the window. Some nights she woke to footsteps, pacing the porch, slow and heavy, not restless exactly, but penance. One evening, she followed the sound. The sky was the color of bruised violets. Beau stood near the railing, staring toward the dark horizon, a folded piece of cloth in his hands. It took her a moment to see what it was. The faded flag of the Confederacy, corners worn, edges singed. He didn't turn when he spoke. "I kept it too long." The words rasped from him like he'd carried years. She said nothing. He struck a match. The flame licked upward, soft orange in the blue dusk. The cloth caught, curled, and blackened. He watched it until it was nothing but ash blowing toward the mountains. When he finally looked at her, the firelight showed his face, older than his years, lined by regret. "Couldn't stand seeing it no more," he said. "Didn't mean what I told myself it did." She nodded once, quietly. The night smelled of smoke and clean slate. Something had shifted, not forgiveness, but the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. By mid-October, the air carried the scent of rain and pine sap. Work filled their days. He fixed the fences. She mended his shirts, though he never asked her to. He dropped the torn fabric at the table and found it sewn by morning. They rarely spoke, but the silence between them grew gentler. Once, while repairing a corral gate, their hands brushed. He flinched first, not from distaste, but from surprise at how warm her skin felt against his calloused palm. That night, she caught him watching her through the open doorway, while she read by lamplight. The air between them shimmered with an unspoken question neither dared name. Then came Lydia March. She arrived one crisp afternoon in a glossy carriage, the color of old wine. Widow March. Pale, elegant, steeped in perfume and superiority. She had once known Beau when he was still Colonel Caldwell of Richmond. My, she said, stepping down. What a frontier picture. You running your own household now, Beau? He inclined his head politely. Always did, ma'am. Her eyes found Clara at the wash line, the brown woman in a calico dress, sleeves rolled, hands wet. Lydia's smile thinned. How industrious. Does she cook as well as she cleans? Clara turned her back to her work without a word. That night, Lydia's laughter echoed down the hall, too loud, too deliberate. She stayed for supper, speaking of old times, Richmond balls, and the fine men who died for honor. Clara listened from the kitchen, blood tightening in her veins. After the widow left, Beau lingered by the door, his shoulders drawn tight. She was a friend of your family? Clara asked evenly. Was, he said. Once. Before you burned your flag? His jaw locked. He didn't answer. When dawn came, the bed in her small room was empty. The wardrobe open, her trunk gone. She left no note, just an apron folded neatly on the table. Beau found the note 2 hours later, a scrap tucked under a plate. Some debts can't be paid with shelter. He saddled his horse, intent on following her trail, but 3 riders crested the hill before he could mount. They were bounty men, thick with arrogance, armed with Winchester rifles. Their leader, Pike, grinned around a toothpick.
"Morning, Colonel," he said. "Fine ranch you got. Shame it's harboring stolen property."
Beau's grip tightened on the reins. What property?
"The colored woman you've been keeping. Name's Holt. Used to belong to a man in Tennessee. Seems he aims to reclaim what's his. You hand her over and we'll ride off civil."
Beau's eyes went cold. "She's no one's property. Not anymore."
"Law might see different," Pike spat. "You forget yourself, Colonel. Men like us bled for her kind to stay where they was."
The hammer of Beau's shotgun clicked back. The sound was small, final. "Step off my land." They didn't. So he fired, not to kill, not yet, but to mark the line between his past and the man he decided to become. One of the riders cried out, clutching his arm. Pike swore, stumbling back. "Tell your master," Beau said, reloading slowly. "If he wants her, he can ride from Tennessee himself. Then we'll see if he's half the man his bounty claims." They left cursing, dust and blood in their wake. Beau mounted and rode hard into the hills. He knew where she'd go, toward the abandoned relay station, the last safe place before the mountains swallowed everything. The storm hit by dusk, black sky, wind like knives, rain slashing sideways. Clara huddled inside the relay station, clutching a small pistol she'd barely known how to fire. The roof leaked. Her dress clung to her skin. She was not praying. She was remembering. The sound of her father's voice reading scripture by candlelight. The feel of chains clinking against the churchyard. The long walk to freedom that still hadn't ended. A horse neighed outside. Then came a thud. Boots. Heavy. Stumbling. She raised the pistol. Breath caught. The door swung open. Lightning framing the man she thought she'd left behind. Beau. Soaked, bleeding, eyes wild. He shut the door with one hand and leaned against it, gasping. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though her voice trembled. "Couldn't let you go," he managed. "Not to them." He slumped by the hearth, where her meager fire crackled. Blood seeped through his sleeve. She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it against the wound, fingers shaking. "You'll live," she whispered. "I wasn't sure I wanted to," he said. Something cracked open in her chest. Anger, pity, something else. "Why risk your life for me, Beau Caldwell? You were one of them once." He looked up, the lamplight catching the storm water on his lashes. "Was. Ain't no more. Burned my flag, buried my shame. You're the first thing since that feels worth defending." The words settled between them, thick as the heat rising from the fire. Her hand lingered on his arm longer than it needed to. He covered it with his. The air changed, slow, magnetic, dangerous. "Don't," she whispered. He didn't move closer. He only waited, eyes steady, until she stopped shaking. When the thunder cracked, she leaned against him, not out of surrender, but because she was tired of standing alone. By dawn, the rain had ended, and light spilled across the floor. She woke against his shoulder, his hand resting, protective, not possessive, against her waist. They didn't speak. Some understandings didn't need language. Winter came hard that year. Snow pressed against the windows of the ranch, and the wind hummed through the rafters like an old hymn. Clara stayed, not because he asked her to, but because something in her refused to run again. The town whispered, of course. The widow March most of all. She saw them once on the main street. Clara buying flour, Beau loading supplies. Lydia's face tightened like a fist. "You'll ruin yourself," she told him. "No one respectable will—" He cut her off with a look that silenced even her tongue. "Reckon I've had enough of respectability, ma'am." When he asked the clerk for a marriage license, the man hesitated. The room felt airless. "Same price for everyone?" Beau said, his tone calm but iron-edged. "Same price," the clerk muttered, stamping the paper. They wed quietly in March, under a sky just beginning to thaw. A few townsfolk came, not out of approval, but out of curiosity. Yet when Beau took Clara's hand, the hush in that small church felt like grace itself. Back at the ranch, he built a cradle by hand. When she laid their newborn in it, he stood behind her, arms encircling without claiming. "What do you see when you look at me now?" she asked softly. He smiled, that slow, rugged thing that reached out his eyes at last. "Home," he said, "and a life I never thought I'd deserve." Outside, the snow melted in silver streams down the hill. The flag was long ash. The house glowed with firelight, and the laughter of a woman who had stopped running, and a man who had finally laid down his ghosts.